Hi everyone, welcome to North and South podcasts. This is Tim speaking. This is going to be a bit of a history politics podcast, but if you want to get involved in North and South podcasts, helping out on podcasts, helping out behind the scenes, feel free to get in touch. We don't just do history politics, we do well-being, creativity. We do stuff to do with financial survival in these hard times, and I'm going to mention more on that a little bit later. This was inspired by a lesson I did in the School of Teaching, and it was about famous speeches and how you persuade people through speech. And I thought, I'm going to do a podcast based on this speech, so I'll come to that in a moment. Please follow me on Twitter at North Podcasts. Please, if you can, financially contribute through coffee. Thanks to Tom and Katie for your recent contributions. Really appreciate it. Also, I just wanted to say as well how important it is for all the people who listen regularly and share and subscribe and spread the word. I can't say enough how it kind of motivates me to keep going. So, with this project moving forward, your support really, really is appreciated. If you want to get in touch, you can get in contact with me through Twitter, or if you know me, message me directly. Stay part of the conversation, and let's move forward together. Just want to say as well about the ADHD podcast I did recently with the excellent comedian and all-round good person Claire Berry. I've had quite a bit of feedback from that from people who say that it's got them really thinking about themselves and maybe the relationship with children. And one person said that after the podcast, they apologised to their adult child for not realising earlier in life what the situation was. And that was quite profound for me to hear that, and also hopefully very profound and a bit of a breakthrough for those people involved. So I've had a lot of feedback from that, from people talking about their own experiences and their experiences with people close to them. So let's get these things out in the open and discuss them as much as possible. Please follow me on YouTube, Spotify, usual stuff. Now, I'm going to read a speech today from Nelson Mandela. Now, if you're the kind of person who's offended by Nelson Mandela, then, you're probably part of that 20% of people who can never be reached, because you don't want to talk about racial justice because of wokeism and all that stuff. But they're pretty extreme interpretations of things which I'm not going to go down. But Nelson Mandela, when I was young, I remember the concerts like Free Mandela, Freedom for South Africa. South Africa was an apartheid state, which basically means apartheid or separation. Right up until the early 90s, they had the first free and fair democratic election in 1994. And after Mandela came other leaders who've not quite lived up to Mandela's example, and who have really struggled to get a handle on the social and economic problems in South Africa. Politically, you give people a vote, great, but if people don't have socio-economic opportunity, political opportunity can mean very little. And you've also got effectively a one-party state in South Africa these days, and it's very, very hard when you have one party in power to meaningfully affect change. But that's something for the modern period, and I don't want to get too sidetracked with the modern issues around South Africa. What I will say is apartheid fundamentally damaged the social fabric in South Africa, and like freeing the slaves in the United States in 1865 doesn't mean that all of those people are suddenly equal the following day with the people around them. That's not true, and we can still see the effects of that today. Who knows what the situation with regards to South Africa will be moving forward in terms of socio-economic and racial justice. But anyway, Nelson Mandela was someone who I looked up to as a youngster, who literally put his life on the line and his freedom on the line for something bigger than himself, a transcendental belief in a free and fair South Africa. He was born in 1918, died 9 years ago now, which is incredible. And he was an anti-apartheid activist, and from 1994 he was the black president of South Africa. He was an African nationalist. He believed in the idea of Africa determining its own future. And he also had socialist leanings, although he was critiqued by many for allowing South Africa to just integrate into the global economy and be exploited after he became the leader. He co-founded a militant group in 1961 because of the non-responsive nature of the South African minority white government, which basically was not interested in any peaceful negotiation or allowing blacks fair and equal representation in society. He was sent to prison for 27 years and he was released in 1990, and it still brings a tear to my eye seeing him released, the footage. And I remember watching it in me mate Williams. Will, hope you're listening. I was in your mum's house with you. We were young, and your mum said, "There he is," when she saw his face emerge from the crowd, and I can still remember that imprinted on my mind. When the apartheid system ended, they had a truth and reconciliation approach to things, and all the horrible things that had happened, they discussed and brought it out into the open. People who were responsible for some of the terrible acts that were committed under apartheid, and the victims saw each other face to face, and it was about moving the nation forward together. And Mandela soon adopted a liberal approach to things, and by liberal I'm not talking like the liberal definition you get in the United States, but just basically someone who believed in human rights and fairness and freedom and in individual empowerment and those kinds of central approaches to the political landscape. In 1952, the South African government imposed a number of pass laws which basically required people to have internal passports, so it severely restricted the ability of black South Africans to move about without being closely monitored and controlled for their labour as well as for where they lived. And they were very, very draconian. It also enforced the segregation that was implicit in the apartheid regime. I'm now going to read the speech "I Am Prepared to Die" by Nelson Mandela, which he said on the 20th of April 1964. And this speech is an abridged version. He spoke for many hours. He was found guilty and sent to prison. But I'm going to read this to you, and hopefully you'll get something from this. Like when I heard it a few weeks ago, I thought, that's a very powerful speech. There's a line in it which I think is just an admission that there is something greater sometimes than the individual human life that we can strive for, and it doesn't need to be necessarily religious. When Sophie Scholl, who was the German student who was guillotined by the Nazi government for distributing anti-Nazi leaflets towards the end of World War II, she said when she went to her death, if you're not willing to fight for something and give your life for something, then you haven't truly lived. And I think that is something that, while we might frown upon people who we consider give their lives for religious or for the wrong reasons, sometimes there are these universal truths which matter more than individual lives. But anyway, here it is. In my youth in the Transkei, I listened to the elders of my tribe telling stories of the old days. Amongst the tales they related to me were those of wars fought by our ancestors in defence of the fatherland. The names of Dingane and Bambata, Moshusho and Sekuhuni were praised as the glory of the entire African nation. Apologies for pronunciation there if you're listening and you know how to say them. I hoped then that life might offer me the opportunity to serve my people and make my own humble contribution to their freedom struggle. This is what has motivated me in all that I have done. Having said this, I must deal immediately with the question of violence. I do not deny that I planned sabotage. I did not plan it in a spirit of recklessness, nor because I have any love of violence. I planned it as a result of a calm and sober assessment of the political situation that had arisen after many years of tyranny, exploitation, and oppression of my people by the whites. I, and the others who started the organisation did so for two reasons. Firstly, we believed that as a result of government policy, violence by the African people had become inevitable, and that unless responsible leadership was given to canalise and control the feelings of our people, there would be outbreaks of terrorism which would produce an intensity of bitterness and hostility between the various races of this country, which is not produced even by war. Secondly, we felt that without violence there would be no way open to the African people to succeed in their struggle against the principle of white supremacy. All lawful modes of expressing opposition to this principle had been closed by legislation, and we were placed in a position in which we had either to accept a permanent state of inferiority or to defy the government. We chose to defy the law. We broke first the law in a way which avoided any recourse to violence when this form was legislated against, and then the government resorted to a show of force to crush opposition to its policies. Only then did we decide to answer violence with violence. But the violence which we chose to adopt was not terrorism. We who formed Umkhonto we Sizwe were all members of the African National Congress and had behind us the ANC tradition of non-violence and negotiation as a means of solving political disputes. We believe that South Africa belongs to all the people who live in it, and not to one group, be it black or white. We did not want an interracial war and tried to avoid it to the last minute. Already scores of Africans had died as a result of racial friction. South Africa is the richest country in Africa and could be one of the richest countries in the world. But it is a land of extremes and remarkable contrasts. The whites enjoy what may well be the highest standards of living in the world, while Africans live in poverty and misery. 30% are labourers, labour tenants and squatters on white farms, and work and live under conditions similar to those of the serfs in the Middle Ages. The complaint of Africans is not only that they are poor and the whites are rich, but that the laws which are made by the whites are designed to preserve this situation. There are two ways to break out of poverty. The first is by formal education, and the second is by the worker acquiring a greater skill at his work and thus higher wages. The present government has always sought to hamper Africans in their search for education. One of their early acts after coming into power was to stop subsidies for African school feeding. Many African children who attended schools depended on this supplement to their diet. There is compulsory education for all white children at virtually no cost to their parents, be they rich or poor. Similar facilities are not provided for the African children. In 1960-61, the per capita government spending on African students at state-aided schools was estimated at 12.46 rand. In the same years, the per capita spending on white children in the Cape Province, which are the only figures available to me, was 144.57 rand. According to the Bantu Educational Journal, only 5,660 African children in the whole of South Africa passed their junior certificate in 1962. And in that year, only 362 passed matric. This is presumably consistent with the policy of Bantu education about which the present Prime Minister said during the debate on the Bantu Education Bill in 1953, quote, "When I have control of native education, I will reform it so that natives will be taught from childhood to realise that equality with Europeans is not for them. People who believe in equality are not desirable teachers for natives. When my department controls native education, it will know for what class of higher education a native is fitted and whether he will have a chance in life to use his knowledge." End quote. Africans who do obtain employment in the unskilled and semi-skilled occupations which are open to them are not allowed to form trade unions which have recognition under the Industrial Conciliation Act. This means that strikes of African workers are illegal and that they are denied the right of collective bargaining, which was permitted to the better paid white workers. The discrimination in the policy of successive South African governments towards African workers is demonstrated by the so-called civilised labour policy, under which sheltered, unskilled government jobs are found for those white workers who cannot make the grade in industry at wages which far exceed the earnings of the average African employee in industry. The government often answers its critics by saying that Africans in South Africa are economically better off than the inhabitants of the other countries in Africa. I do not know whether this statement is true and doubt whether any comparison can be made without having regard to the cost of living index in such countries. But even if it is true, as far as the African people are concerned, it is irrelevant. Our complaint is not that we are poor by comparison with people in other countries, but that we are poor by comparison with the white people in our own country, and that we are prevented by legislation from altering this imbalance. The lack of human dignity experienced by Africans is the direct result of the policy of white supremacy. White supremacy implies black inferiority. Legislation designed to preserve white supremacy entrenches this notion. Menial tasks in South Africa are invariably performed by Africans. When anything has to be carried or cleaned, the white man will look around for an African to do it for him, whether the African is employed by him or not. Because of this sort of attitude, whites tend to regard Africans as a separate breed. They do not look upon them as people with families of their own. They do not realise that they have emotions, that they fall in love like white people do, that they want to be with their wives and children like white people want to be with theirs, that they want to earn enough money to support their families properly, to feed and clothe them and send them to school. And what houseboy or garden boy or labourer can ever hope to do this? Pass laws, which to the Africans are among the most hated bits of legislation in South Africa, render any African liable to police surveillance at any time. I doubt whether there is a single African male in South Africa who has not at some stage had a brush with the police over his pass. Hundreds and thousands of Africans are thrown into jail each year under pass laws. Even worse than this is the fact that pass laws keep husband and wife apart and lead to the breakdown of family life. I think that, this is me speaking, I think that refers to the fact that often you had to stay in a particular area where a job was, which may be away from your family. Back to the speech. Poverty and the breakdown of family life have secondary effects. Children wander about the streets of the townships because they have no schools to go to, or no money to enable them to go to school, or no parents at home to see that they go to school, because both parents, if there be two, have to work to keep the family alive. This leads to a breakdown in moral standards, to an alarming rise in illegitimacy, and to growing violence which erupts not only politically, but everywhere. Life in the townships is dangerous. There is not a day that goes by without somebody being stabbed or assaulted, and violence is carried out of the townships into the white living areas. People are afraid to walk alone in the streets after dark. House breakings and robberies are increasing, despite the fact that the death sentence can now be imposed for such offences. Death sentences cannot cure this festering sore. Africans want to be paid a living wage. Africans want to be allowed to live where they obtain work and not be endorsed out of an area because they were not born there. Africans want to be allowed to own land in places where they work and not to be obliged to live in rented houses, which they can never call their own. Africans want to be part of the general population and not confined to living in their own ghettos. African men want to have their wives and children to live with them, where they work, and not be forced into an unnatural existence in men's hostels. African women want to be with their menfolk and not be left permanently widowed in the reserves. Africans want to be allowed out after 11 o'clock at night and not to be confined to their rooms like little children. Africans want to be allowed to travel in their own country and to seek work where they want to and not where the Labour Bureau tells them to. Africans want a just share in the whole of South Africa. They want security and a stake in society. Above all, we want equal political rights, because without them, our disabilities will be permanent. I know this sounds revolutionary to the whites in this country, because the majority of voters will be Africans. This makes the white man fear democracy. But this fear cannot be allowed to stand in the way of the only solution which will guarantee racial harmony and freedom for all. It is not true that the enfranchisement of all will result in racial domination. Political division based on colour is entirely artificial, and when it disappears, so will the domination of one colour group by another. The struggle is a truly national one. It is a struggle of the African people, inspired by their own suffering and their own experience. It is a struggle for the right to live. During my lifetime, I have dedicated myself to this struggle of the African people. I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if it needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. I remember the young conservatives in the 80s wearing little badges, hang Mandela, because he was considered a terrorist. And I remember Margaret Thatcher saying, apartheid will never end in South Africa, in protest against the fact that there was countries around the world and different people who were boycotting South Africa because of apartheid. And it just shows how things can change. But I thought that speech was beautiful in its commandeering of the facts, its precision in what it wants, its addressing of the fears of the other side, and its profound statement at the end. Think about Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech and the repetition. And then at the end, he finishes with those great lines. This is much more about facts. And at the end, that statement, this is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. It's very, very powerful indeed. So I listened to that speech a few weeks ago, said by an actor, and I was following on a sheet, the script, and I found it very moving. And I thought I would share that with you today. So I hope you got something from that. If you want to study the South African situation, South Africa used to be part of the British Empire, and there was a difficulty between the British colonialists and the white Afrikaans who apparently came from the Netherlands before the Enlightenment and moved out there. And of course the local blacks. It's quite an interesting history, South Africa, if you haven't studied it. But the lessons of South Africa are there for all to see, moving into the modern world. And I believe a young cricketer, 26-year-old cricketer who's just burst onto the scene, he's a black cricketer. And there's been a bit of tension with the Black Lives Matter movement. Some former white South African cricketers have come out against it and criticised the statement he made, which when I read the statement, it was very kind of neutral and balanced. And these are the kind of big issues we've still got today. And again, you take away political rights, things go wrong. But to just give people political rights without socio-economic rights, and to wrong the huge structural injustices of the past in places like South Africa, it's not an easy task, and I wish there were easy solutions. Right, thanks everyone for listening. Have a great week and be good to each other.